So about a year ago, I wrote this book, and the reason I wrote it is because I had transitioned a year before that, or that was kind of when I completed my social transition, was about a year before that. And when I started to tell people and I started to come out to people, one of the challenges that I felt was that people would have questions and they'd want answers, and I wouldn't always know the answers. And so that was an incredible amount of pressure. My family, my friends, my coworkers, and others, you know, they'd want to be supportive, and they'd want to talk to me about it, and they'd want to ask me questions. And in the meantime, I was still finding myself. And so after I went through that process, I really wanted to just write a short resource for people who want to be allies. It's not an academic text. It's not going to explain why somebody's transgender or why any of those things, right? What it is going to do is it's going to give you, you know, the basic terminology and some of the challenges that trans people face, and some of the actions that you can take in order to be a better ally. It's often very hard, you know, as you're sitting there and you're trying to come out and you're trying to find yourself, and when people start asking you questions, and you don't have the answers to those questions, that makes you question yourself, and that can be so toxic because there are so many obstacles you have to face and overcome. And as you enter public spaces and as you interact with people and you talk to people, when you question yourself, it slows your process and makes you second guess everything that you're doing. And so just relieving that pressure through providing a resource for other people to have that information was a goal of mine. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was non-binary identities. That's often one of the biggest challenges that parents and families and friends have when their youth may not identify within the gender binary, may not identify as a man or a woman. And let me start by explaining the difference there, right? So when I was born, the doctor pointed at me and said, it's a boy, right? And so the doctor identified my sex. And sex and gender are different things. So when you're talking about sex, it's male and female. When you're talking about gender, it's man and woman. But neither of those exist in the binary. And what I mean by that is there's not just male and female, there are also intersex people. And intersex people are people who may have components of both sexes. And that's surprisingly, that's much more common than people think it is. 1.7% of the population is intersex. That's the same percentage as people who are natural-born redheads. So you can see that this idea that the binary exists in the sex is false. Well, the same thing is true for gender. So we're so used to, when I grew up, you know, all we talked about was man and woman, and you had to be this, and man meant this, and woman meant that. But most of the kids today, or most of the kids that I interact with at the university, are not choosing a gender. They find themselves somewhere in the middle, between masculine and feminine, or not an insignificant number, don't really feel like they have a gender. They identify as agender. And these concepts are challenging for people who grew up knowing who they were, right? And one of the things that you have to remember about identity is something that each of us owns, right? My identity is my own, just as your identity is your own. And just as you wouldn't expect someone to walk up to you and tell you who you are, you have to not do that to other people. You have to trust in what people are, what someone is telling you when they talk about their gender identity. Beyond that, you don't really have to understand when they're first telling you what their gender identity is. What you do have to understand is how to treat them with respect. And so the way to do that is to find out their pronouns. And so I use she or her pronouns, so I would introduce myself and I would say, my name is Jessica, I use she, her, hers pronouns. What pronouns do you use? That allows the other person to come out to you in a safe space. It establishes the room and the environment and the safety of that space. One of the other things that I have to point out specifically for people who are, I'm 52, and when I grew up, if I used they as a singular pronoun, it would have been marked wrong. But all major standards organizations have accepted they, them, and theirs as singular pronouns. And that is a very common pronoun for people who are non-binary to use. One of the other things I kind of wanted to talk about, because as you know, I sit and on the panel here, this is a very white passing panel, and probably white. I just didn't consult with everyone before I started talking. People of different skin colors and different ethnicities face very different challenges as an LGBT person. And as probably the best example of that I can give has to do with transgender people of color. It's considerably more dangerous to be a transgender person of color. Every year on November 20th, the transgender community recognizes Transgender Day of Remembrance, and we read off the names of the transgender people who were murdered in America for who they are. And almost invariably, most of that list is transgender people of color. Frankly, the list is almost totally black transgender women. It's much more dangerous, it's much more challenging to go through life with these intersectional identities. And when I talk about intersectional identities, each of us has many identities that define who we are, right? So I'm white, and I'm a woman, and I'm transgender. And the three of those things add together changes the way my privilege and my marginalization as I go through life. And because I'm white, there are spaces that I'm safer in than a person of color. Because I'm a woman, there are spaces that I'm not as safe in as I would be if I were a man. I am afraid to walk across Austin in the dark after nightfall. We can go down this long list of all of the reasons that being a woman is less safe than being a man. And when you add those layers on top of each other, it changes our experience and the outcome. So we have to be conscious of that. I think I probably occupied my 15 minutes. Thanks.